How's it going, guys? It's Chris here. Today we're going to be watching this video. House prices keep rising as investors flip properties. Obviously a pretty divisive topic. A lot of people believe property investors are the reason house prices have gone up so much. Potentially they are. Potentially they're just one of the many factors. Anyway, let's get into it. Full video is linked below as always.
Jason Cox has become skilled at fixing up and selling properties for a profit.
Our method is to have around about 5 properties and flip one out every year, and that way you've got that cyclical 5-year turnaround in the properties. And so we bought properties, Port Douglas, all over the place.
Jason wants to continue claiming tax breaks for his existing properties, but accepts changes should apply to future investments.
I'm fine with that because I've got a daughter and I am concerned about rising house prices. So we need to do something.
So exactly right. Like, it's easy for people that already own 1 or 2 houses to be able to buy another one because they can use the equity to afford these houses. Like, a normal Australian's not going to be able to get into, or a first home buyer is not going to be able to get into one of these $1 million houses because the mortgage, the down payment on that's like 200 grand, right? Plus then you got stamp duty and all these other fees, legal fees, conveyancer fees, whatever you've got, right? So the only people that are able to afford these really nice, expensive houses in the top tier suburbs are people that already own a house, that have seen property growth, that has hopefully able to explode them up and be able to, draw down equity to buy those bigger houses. And soon it won't even be just the big nice houses that people won't be able to afford unless they already own a house. It'll just be a regular shithole house, which in Sydney and Brisbane, it's pretty much already at that stage where you can't afford these pretty shitbox stock standard houses unless you already own a house, because it's getting that expensive and that ridiculous.
Prices rose for a third straight month in April to a new record high, up 0.3% for the month and 3.2% for the year. More than $2,700 was added to the median home value. Darwin led the monthly gains, followed by Hobart, the regions, Perth, Brisbane, Canberra, Adelaide, Sydney and Melbourne.
I think we're still looking at price rises over the course of the year, with lower interest rates being the main tailwind.
The only mainstream party calling for a reduction in tax breaks this election is the Greens. It wants to scrap negative gearing and
clearly they did not do very well because I don't think they got any seats. Maybe they got one or 2 seats, right? So obviously people aren't, the 60-odd% of people that own houses either through a mortgage or outright don't want to see house prices come down, and that's fair enough. Like, I mean, if I owned a house, I wouldn't want to see house prices come down. However, they need to come down for these first home buyers to actually get in and have a shot at buying prices. Because the problem is they compound every single year, and every single, like a 3% growth this year is like a 10% growth 2 or 3 years ago, right?
capital gains tax discount on investment properties, with the exception of one property for existing owners. This Brisbane homeowner thinks that's sensible.
It feels like the country has changed, and not for the better, by making poorer and richer richer.
Laurent has paid off the family home and is looking to invest in a rental property. Despite standing to gain from generous housing tax breaks, he's disappointed the major parties haven't proposed changes this election.
I feel that the Australian public and the housing market would be much better served if the money that was used towards negative gearing would instead be used to build new homes.
Not even just that, but actually invest in industries to actually get people getting better jobs and stimulate an economy through actual growth rather than just housing prices growth. Like, it's pretty ridiculous how much our economy is propped up by mining and housing. It's crazy. And these things are, they're finite in a sense, right? They'll eventually run out. The housing price, the housing bubble will eventually pop. The resources will eventually run out. And then what's Australia left with? Nothing.
An Institute wants to see negative gearing wound back and the capital gains discount reduced to 25%. Under that policy, it estimates prices would fall by about 1%, but it says $11 billion would be added to the budget bottom line, which could be used to build new homes.
We need to reform planning restrictions. We need to allow more building. I don't think property taxes are very important for the housing affordability crisis. The estimates of the changes will change house prices by 1%, 2%, 4%. It's a non-issue in terms of the big crisis we're facing. To address that, we need to boost supply.
Downward pressure on
Yeah, what's 1% really going to do? Is that actually going to do much for anyone? Like, not really. So why make this such a big, decisive topic? Negative gearing, yeah, it's probably not the right thing for it to be there. But is it making much of a difference? No. Will it ever solve the housing crisis issue? No. At the end of the day, yeah, it's supply. And that we're bringing in way too many people that we can't even keep up with our current shortfall of houses, let alone these new people that are coming in. So negative gearing is just, it's not even something to be worried about. I think we need to be worried about this over demand and under supply. Simple economics, right?
prices would boost affordability.
If house prices were to fall by, say, 5 to 10% over a 3-year period, that would do more to improve the chances of younger people becoming homeowners than anything that any government has done in the last 6.
100%, 5 to 7% over 3 years. It's not enough to make people scared, but to actually see that happen and see it happen without it dropping down 20 or 30%, it's got to be pretty well calculated, right? And obviously that 5 to 10% decrease would help that multiple, I think it's 13 times the median salary is what the average house costs or whatever. So if you can bring that number down to a more reasonable level, 7 times, 7 times is still too high, but it's more reasonable than 13, right? That would help first home buyers get in. But at the same cost, what happens if you're a first home buyer and you've just bought just before these reforms came in and then you lose 10%? That's not really fair for you. You know, you've worked hard, you've saved up the money, you've done the extra hours, you've worked 60, 70, 80 hours a week, you've saved up a huge deposit, you're able to get in, and then, you get in with a 10% deposit, and then 3 years later, the house price has gone down by 10%. You've just lost your deposit. You just lost that, 2 or 3, 4 years of work. It's gone down the drain. Is that fair? No, that's not fair. So it's at any given point on anything that we do, someone's going to hurt. And that's the shitty part.
60 years.
Australia could withstand at least modest price falls in housing values. For example, we looked at resales data in the December quarter of last year and found that if we reduced across the board sales prices by 10%, you'd still have almost 90% of Australian home sellers making a gross profit.
It's a solid looking house. Sweet.
Jason says to solve the housing crisis, politicians need to be more honest about the impact of their decisions.
I would be quite cautious about the detail because it can be a slippery slope.
A slippery slope that the major parties have steered away from this election.
That's at the end of the day, the governments are, they're bought up and they're very corrupt and they're getting paid very big incentives to keep house prices high, to keep the way the country is right now the way it is, because at the end of the day, it's just making the richer richer, and the richer people have that money to throw away at the governments to keep themselves in a position where they're able to make shitloads of money while the average hardworking Australian barely gets by. Is it fair? Hell no. But it's the world we live in, and as I said before, if you want to get ahead, you just gotta freaking work your ass off for a couple years and just send it and save up, and then you can potentially get in a house. If you don't want to buy a house, buy stocks, move countries, become a digital nomad. There's so many options out there. Obviously, working is part of life. But yeah, it just depends how much you want to work and how much you want something and how far you actually go to get it, right? Anyway, guys, if you guys enjoyed, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Make sure you subscribe, especially if you got all this way. Like only 90% of you or 99% of you guys are actually subscribed, so that'd be really appreciated, and I'll catch you in the next one.